The ego is the system that runs your sense of self. It is made out of thought patterns, emotions, and behavioral loops, and the stories that try to hold it all together. Left unchecked, it creates endless existential searching, chronic disconnection, and the persistent sense that something is wrong. The goal of my videos is clarity, to see your identity and its contradictions for what they are, named precisely, to finally understand what it is that we're all running away from. Usually people find themselves in this existential awakening conundrum because something very traumatizing has happened to them, or they are expecting something very awful happening to them, or they are in direct confrontation with their own death, or they have pondered so much the existence of their own self that suddenly the awareness, while scanning its own experience, makes this sort of switch where they've suddenly noticed that they don't exist in the way they thought they did. People tend to identify with their thoughts, and they believe in the stories these thoughts tell. And this is like the normal operating system of all humans, and it is always a lie. Thoughts are not reality. They are a projection of the mind on top of reality. And then the idea that you are the person who is speaking or the person who is thinking is an identification mechanism that doesn't really map on to who you really are. And through these traumatizing or very existential experiences, suddenly this becomes extremely clear. The nature of sensing to be somebody comes way before any thought or idea. And it becomes very visceral the moment you're confronted with death and suffering. Because then, no matter how much you want to kind of think yourself out of the situation that you're finding yourself in, it's not working. You still have to experience what is going to happen to you, or you still have to experience what has happened to you and kind of relive it or be in the memory of it. And the body wants to be in denial about it. It wants to pretend that what has happened or what is going to happen is not true. And in the what is going to happen case, it's usually related to our own sense of death, that death is inevitable. And paradoxically enough, when we think about what has happened, then we feel like we should be able to not have to experience, that somehow there must be a way to escape this existence. And a lot of people who are very attached or attracted to the idea of no self, they want to believe that they can somehow escape reality by escaping into awareness. And then the spiritual identity becomes the identity of the ego, which is the part of you that doesn't want to exist, which invents all of these lies and delusions to keep you identified with parts of you, like thoughts, in order to not realize that psychologically you do not exist in the way you think you do. And then by confronting these very deep emotional holes, you find yourself without the ability to deny it anymore. You might have pondered your own existence so much that the fact that all of these ideas that other people have about you, or these ideas that you have had about yourself, they cannot map on to what you actually are, because you are not found in the ideas of anything. You're not even found in stories of yourself. Like, even if you say the accomplishments that you've had, if you narrate the experience that you've had in your life, none of this matters really when you're alone in your room and there's nobody there. Then all of the social signaling that we do, all these people that we're trying to please, all the fantasies that we have where we finally are happy or are in alignment with our true self, all of them start to seem quite empty. And emptiness is such a crucial component of the realization of no self, because it is a process of dying into life and dying into experience. And this sounds very paradoxical if you think that dying means to not exist anymore or to cease existing. But more so, it's that false identifications cease to exist. The belief that you could hold yourself onto a narrative and then make this narrative real for you, like fantasies of building a multi-million-dollar empire, or finally making your parents proud, or being yeah, being like a super great athlete or whatever. Whenever the ego attaches its own sense of identity to these things, they are always fantasies. It's not that these things can't happen for you or that you cannot have goals in your life which to pursue, but they will never fulfill the ego identity that wants to attach its own name to these stories. The ambition to have a great life comes from a sincere place of self-compassion, a part that cares about yourself beyond the narratives, beyond the ideas that you have about who you are or who you should be. But there's like deep compassion about a part of you that will always be there, but it is not wrapped up in these fantasies of the ego. The idea to make something meaningful out of your life and to make your life matter is really a process of self-compassion. And the fear and terrifying realization of the lack of a selfhood is also a byproduct of the amount of compassion that then gets liberated throughout the entire body. Because as paradoxical as it might seem, losing your sense of self makes you more feeling. Becoming more empty within existence makes you more connected to actual reality. Because the ego barrier that tries to filter experience through your own thoughts or through other people's projection of what reality is like thins out. And through this thinning mechanism, you experience more sensations. You cannot now deny the feelings that you have been feeling, and you cannot deny the desires that you have left unfulfilled. There's so much that the ego is in denial about its own experience that suddenly cannot be in denial about anymore. And this is both true for what you want to happen and for what has happened, but also for what didn't happen and you wish it has happened, right? Like a lot of regrets and things that we feel guilty about that keeps haunting us. And through all of this, there is still this sort of empty center that you always find your own existence in. You are empty of a true solid self. And through this process of realizing this emptiness, you find closer and closer who you actually are. And this process is usually full of fear and regret and discomfort and anxiety. And you will believe yourself to be going crazy and that something is really wrong with you. If you realize the nature of no self for the first time, and it doesn't have this low grade, valent, positive sense to it, but just this shocking sensation that you will be eternally alone and nobody will ever connect to you ever again, then you are kind of hitting the rock bottom for a moment of what it means to truly realize no self for yourself. So the entire matrix or the entire like structure of your own consciousness is always real, and the perception of your own existence is always real, but the identification mechanism as in you being a point in consciousness or a point in awareness or a point in your head or a point within your thoughts ceases. And then by seizing this point into the overall consciousness, you expand into what feels like nothing at all. And this is where the sense of emptiness fully comes up and where the nervous system starts to regulate itself and has to, confront itself with a ton of experiences that it wished it could deny. And so much about what we humans do in our day-to-day basis is the basis of denial, is to not acknowledge our feelings, not to acknowledge our desires, not acknowledge who we are and who we want to be, and how much work there's still to be done within this own, kind of insecure sense of self. Society props up this false sense of self by giving you little breadcrumbs of validation and sense of belonging. And to a large degree, it is natural to want to belong to a group of people and to feel like validated by your own beliefs and whatever you think. Like you don't want to be around a group of friends where everybody thinks that you're stupid. That wouldn't be a fulfilling life to live. But at the same time, if you're truly completely emptied out by the sense of self, the mechanism that is looking for these like deep social connections in order to feel fulfilled also dies, which is also a part of the fear that wonders, where am I even existing at? Like, how can I orient myself in this 3D reality if all I see is my own conscious emptiness and I cannot really connect to another person anymore? The question of who am I is as valid as the question of where am I? Because although you can move yourself in a 3D local space, in a very meaningful way, consciousness is non-local, and there's no way you can find where you are. The awareness of your conscious experience is not mappable into 3D space. That's why we are so confused about the nature of consciousness, because where are you located? When you smell something, you might say the smell originates in your brain, so you shouldn't feel it in your nose, you should feel it in your brain, which is very silly. But then, okay, so the smell is located in your nose, but it's not true because it comes from something outside of you. So there's always the collapse of multiple mechanisms at the same time that creates the sense of qualia. It is what creates the sense of sensation. And then we have so many of these colliding qualias happening that forms our sense of reality through our conscious experience, which is basically a ton of sensations that quickly fluctuate over a short period of time. And what the sense of identity then tries to do is it tries to pretend that things do not fluctuate and that there's somewhere a you there that is solid and can be found and can be identified as, and that it can be seen. And then this desire to be seen is this desire to feel validated by who you think you are, which is kind of ironic, right? Because it's like you have a self-image of who you are already in your head. And now, in order for you to believe in it, you must validate it through other people's perceptions of you. When in some way you might argue you can see yourself better than anybody because you see yourself from your own point of view. But then also, you don't know how you look like from the outside at all because people look at you from the outside and your voice sounds different from a third person perspective. Every person filters who you are through their own ego architecture and has their own way of perceiving you. So even in this like validation seeking mechanism, firstly, you're never going to find yourself because depending on who looks at you, they'll see something different. And on the other side, who you are is always changing. And there's no way you can localize a sense of identity and make it solid by being perceived, because even the perception is non-local. You cannot really tell where exactly the perceiving of anybody or anything is happening. Now, this can be very ungrounding when realized because you now have nothing to tether yourself with. As normally the ego identifies or tethers itself to its own thoughts, now there are no thoughts anymore, and then you even kind of reject other people's perspective because you don't really have access to their perspective, and you understand that their perspective is also faulty because of their own ego. And then it's just like, okay, so what do I do with this? Right? There's just emptiness, and I don't know what I want anymore, or it seems like that society just told me what I want, and I actually never knew what I wanted. So then what are you left to do but to just kind of go mad for a while? Because it seems like you are forever lost in a sea of disconnection. The surprising difference, or like the surprising shift that happens, is when you start to settle into the amount of different qualities that are around you, and you start to recognize that you have always been made of these sensations that swirl around and are impermanent. And somehow there is an empty sense of self, which is the only way I can really describe it. But there's a sort of 0 point of awareness where there's truly nothing at all. Like there's nothing, it's just empty. And this is where you can find yourself. It is the non-perceiver that perceives all sensations. It's the fact that when you smell something, and when you hear something, and when you see something, it all happens simultaneously without any effort whatsoever. So when you die into life, you destroy the mechanism that believes it is doing it. Like, instead of thinking that you are the one who's smelling, or you are the one who's seeing or hearing, you understand that it has always been the case that hearing happens by itself, that smelling happens by itself, and that seeing happens by itself. In fact, all sense modalities happen by itself. The desire to localize a sense of identity is the desire to find somebody who is in control. And you believe, through dissolving into conscious experience, that you're losing control, because the ego is under the belief that it can control its experience, when it was never actually in charge. It was just a filtering mechanism guided by fear, who tries to protect its sense of identity through all of its neurotic and anxious behavior. What is surprising is that once you thin out this ego layer deeply enough, you'll find yourself in a much more peaceful space, because reality flows through you, and there was never anything to do and anywhere to be. Things are always lining up through these different causes and conditionings into the current experience all by itself. There's nothing you need to do. In the same way, you can connect with other people just by being in their presence. You don't need to localize where they're at. You don't need to find commonalities necessarily, because you both have the commonality of being a conscious being, like you're both human. And this even can be enough if you're able to be present with the person without trying to show them who you are, or without them trying to kind of impress you. But just by sharing space with another, you can connect. By seeing somebody without your own ego interfering in the perception of who they are, maybe they find the power within them to also lower their guard and be direct and honest with you. And then within the interaction and connection with another people, you can also find yourself. And this connection is also there with any other sense modalities. There are no sensations that you cannot connect with. Or better said, you're always connecting with all sensations, if you want it or not. The belief that you could somehow escape experience or not have to sense senses is the delusion of the ego. The same way that the ego is deluded in thinking that it can't die, that somehow death is never going to happen to you because of the deep held belief that death is something that happens to other beings, until death knocks at your door. And it's very obvious that no, death is a guarantee for every being. And the psychological part there can understand this and die into life more naturally by not clinging anymore to all of these sensations. The sense of clinging to sense modalities is this kind of ego way of trying to solidify something that is just always impermanent. The same way it does so with thought, the same way it does so with the ideas of successes you could have in the future. So the only way out of it is through. There's no way you can kind of bypass the solution of the sense of identity. And it is correct to perceive that there's no real center within your own experience. And as terrifying as it initially might seem, as much as it might seem that you have forever destroyed a part of yourself, you haven't. You have actually found a closer connection to who you always were.